They always said he was born for greatness, but they forgot I was born too. It always started the same way, every family gathering. Every birthday, every damned Christmas dinner. My brother, Aaron, would walk in 10 minutes late, wearing some tailored suit, and suddenly, every head turned. My mom's voice would rise 3 octaves, giddy like a schoolgirl. There he is. Our golden boy. My dad would slap his back like they were war buddies. My aunt would beam as if the Messiah himself had just arrived. And then there was me. Sitting quietly at the far end of the table, my chair half wobbly, my fork missing. No one remembered I was there until someone needed more gravy. Aaron was always the pride of the family. Valedictorian full scholarship, Ivy League MBA. When he got hired by a Fortune 500 company straight out of college, they said it was fate, a calling, destiny, as if his success was proof of the family's superior genetics. And me, I was just a side note. He's trying to figure things out, they'd say, like I was a broken appliance in need of repair. You know what's funny? They never even asked what I wanted to be. Not once. I remember the night I told my mom I wanted to learn programming. I had found this free online bootcamp and thought maybe, just maybe, I could make something of myself. She laughed, not cruelly, just dismissively. The kind of laugh that cuts deeper than screaming. Oh sweetie, that's what people do when they don't get into real college. I had never wanted to disappear so badly. Aaron, of course, had a different path. When he said he wanted to study finance, the whole house became a shrine to capitalism. My dad even bought a tiny Wall Street bull sculpture and placed it above the fireplace. The irony, he didn't even know what a hedge fund was. But if Aaron touched it, it became gold. I wasn't jealous. At least not at first. I just wanted a chance. A word of encouragement. Hell, even a nod would have been enough. But when Aaron got a brand new Audi for graduation and I got a $20 gift card to Target, I realized something. Love in my family had terms and conditions, so I stopped trying to win it. I moved out the day I turned 19. No one begged me to stay. No one even helped me pack. I loaded my hand-me-down Toyota Corolla with a garbage bag full of clothes and a crate of second-hand programming books. My dad barely looked up from the TV. You sure about this? He asked. Life's not easy when you're stubborn. But he didn't stop me. Not that I expected him to. I got a job at a coffee shop during the day, and I took free coding courses at night. I lived in a shoebox of a studio with cracked walls and a neighbor who played drums at 3 a.m. But for the first time in my life, the air felt breathable. Every bug I fixed, every line of code that worked, it felt like magic. My magic. And no one could take that from me. But oh, you should have seen the way my mom looked at me the next Thanksgiving. I had managed to land a few freelance clients and was paying rent on time. I even wore a blazer. But she introduced me to her friends like I was trying out tech stuff for now. No mention of the hours I spent, the nights I worked through, exhaustion, the money I had started to actually bring in. Meanwhile, Aaron had just been promoted to VP of Strategic Growth. I could practically hear the champagne popping in her voice every time she said it. You should talk to your brother, my dad told me while cutting his turkey. Maybe he can help you get a real job. A real job. Because freelance work in a field they didn't understand wasn't real. Because if it didn't come with a glossy office and a big name badge, it didn't count. I nodded, smiled, said nothing, but inside, a switch flipped. I wasn't going to wait for them to see me. I would make it impossible not to. So I doubled down. I stopped going to family dinners. Every hour I would have spent trying to explain myself, I spent refining my skills. I took on more contracts. Started building a SaaS product with a friend I met online. We worked out of a shared Google Doc and Slack calls at midnight. There was no backup plan, no safety net, only grit and caffeine. And still, they didn't ask, didn't call, didn't check in. Until one day, I got a call, but not from them. It was a recruiter. A real one. From a real VC-backed startup based in California. They had seen my open source contributions. They wanted me as their lead backend engineer. Stock options. Remote work. 6 figures, base. I stared at the screen for 10 full seconds before accepting. I had made it, quietly, alone. A week later, I sent a group text to my family.me. Just accepted a job as lead backend engineer. Startup in SF remote. Starts Monday. It took 5 hours for someone to respond. Mom, oh, good for you, so proud, now. And just like that, I realized something else. Their pride was conditional. It wasn't about MIT, was about optics. About being able to say to their friends, "Look, my other son didn't completely mess up. But I wasn't doing this for them anymore. I wasn't the golden child. I never would be. But I was becoming something better. Free." You ever notice how the people who once dismissed you start using words like "we" the second you succeed? "We always knew you'd do something great." No, you didn't. If you did, you wouldn't have ignored me when I came home tired and broken from working double shifts. You wouldn't have compared me to Aaron like I was some faulty knockoff of the real product. You wouldn't have smirked when I said I was building something of my own. But now that I had a job title and a salary worth bragging about, suddenly I was ours again. The shift was subtle, but I noticed it everywhere. My mom started tagging me in family photos again. My dad asked if I could take a look at his LinkedIn. Even Aaron messaged me for the first time in 2 years, "Hey man, congrats on the new gig. Impressive stuff." I stared at that message for a long time. It was friendly, polite, safe, and completely hollow. See, what he didn't say was, "Sorry for ignoring you," or "I wish I had been there when you were struggling," or even just, "I was wrong." But Aaron never admitted to being wrong. That was beneath him. Still, part of me wanted to reply. Maybe we could reset things. Maybe we could finally be brothers. So, I texted back, "Thanks, it's been a ride." 2 minutes later, he replied, "Listen, do you have any experience with blockchain integrations? Our team is struggling with a client project. Thought you might be able to help." And just like that, there it was. The real reason: he didn't want to connect. He wanted something. It hit me like a punch to the chest. The whole family had always been like this, transactional. You were either a provider or a burden, a trophy or a footnote. I left him on read. A month passed. I poured myself into the new job. The team was fast-paced, innovative, and young. We built tools that saved people time and money, and I finally had coworkers who respected my input. For once, I didn't feel like I had to prove I belonged. I just did. Meanwhile, the messages from my family kept trickling in. My mom started calling weekly, though the calls always ended the same way. "That's great, honey. So Aaron's working with a new hedge fund now." Of course he was. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. It was a Sunday morning. I had just finished a 3-hour debugging session when my phone rang. My dad, which was rare. He rarely called me unless something was wrong. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hey." There was a long pause on the other end, then his voice, low, tired, "We need to talk." Turns out, things weren't going so well in the house of Aaron. A small investment mistake had turned into a massive debt. A risky expansion deal he championed at his firm had gone south. His name had been on the paperwork. The firm was distancing itself. His personal assets were frozen, pending litigation. And the family. They had co-signed a secondary mortgage to help him buy a luxury condo last year. Now the bank wanted its money. "What does this have to do with me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. My dad cleared his throat. "Well, you're doing well now. And your brother, he's in a tough spot." He didn't say it, but he meant it. Save him, bail him out. Be the brother he never was to you. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to remind him of every time they left me to rot in silence while Aaron basked in their love like it was his birthright. But instead, I said calmly, "Let me think about it." We hung up. I sat at the edge of my bed, hands shaking. Not from panic but from the weight of the decision ahead. Because now, for the first time in my life, they needed me, and it wasn't a small debt. They were in for nearly $2 million. The condo, legal fees, interest, penalties. Aaron had gambled their financial security on a deal he thought couldn't fail. And now, the golden boy was rusting fast. I called my lawyer friend, Mark, who had helped me set up my first LLC. I laid out the situation. "Technically, you owe them nothing," he said, "but emotionally, that's a different ballgame." I thanked him, hung up, and stared out the window for what felt like hours. I wasn't heartless. I didn't want my parents to lose their home. But this wasn't just about money, it was about the message. Because if I said yes, if I bailed them out, they'd never see me as anything more than their emergency parachute, the backup plan. But if I said no, they'd call me cruel, ungrateful, vengeful. That's the trap people like me find ourselves in. Silence is weakness, and strength is arrogance. 3 days later, I drove to my parents' house. The same house I had left in silence at 19. I hadn't been back in nearly 4 years. The lawn was still perfectly trimmed. The white shutters freshly painted. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. Aaron was there, sitting on the couch like a deflated balloon. He looked thinner, pale, not like the sleek, confident brother I remembered. He stood up when I entered. "Hey," he said, softly. "Hey." We sat. The air was thick with unspoken years. My mom brought in coffee. My dad sat quietly, staring at the rug. And then I spoke. "I'll cover the debt," I said, "but under 3 conditions." Their heads snapped up. 1. The condo goes on the market immediately. You're not keeping it. 2. You all sign a formal repayment agreement. I don't care if it takes 10 years, I want a contract. And 3. I looked at Aaron. You stop pretending we're brothers unless you mean it. He blinked, like I'd slapped him. I'm not doing this to save you. I'm doing this so mom and dad don't end up homeless. But I'm not your safety net. And I sure as hell am not your footnote anymore. Silence. Then my dad nodded slowly. That's fair. For once, I believed him. As I walked out the door, contract folder in hand, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free, because I didn't owe them my silence anymore, and they didn't own my success. When I got back to my apartment that night, I sat on the floor with the lights off. Just me, the hum of the city outside, and a quiet I hadn't felt in years. I should have felt powerful. I had just flipped the entire family dynamic on its head. They came crawling to me. The kid they used to ignore at dinner, the one who heard "Why can't you be more like Aaron?" more times than his own name. But instead of victory, I felt hollow, because when you've spent your whole life being invisible, and then suddenly become indispensable not because they love you, but because they need you, it doesn't feel like love, it feels like leverage. And leverage is a lonely throne to sit on. I didn't tell anyone about the deal. Not my coworkers, not even the handful of friends I trusted. I wanted to keep my work life clean, untainted by the dysfunction I came from. But dysfunction has a way of leaking through the cracks. A week after the agreement was signed, Aaron emailed me, "No hi. No, hope you're doing well. Just hey, any way you can fast track the next transfer. We're getting pressure from the lawyers." Pressure? From the lawyers? As if I were his assistant. As if I were part of this mess by choice. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the email to my lawyer, asked him to confirm the payment schedule, and added a note at the bottom. All further communication goes through you. I had drawn a boundary, a thick indelible line in the sand. And if they crossed it, I'd burn the whole map. That was the beginning of a new phase in my life, not just financially, but emotionally. I wasn't the same kid anymore. I was someone who could walk into the family house, look the favorite child in the eye, and dictate the terms. But the price of that power was never being seen as a son again. My parents tried, I'll give them that. After the payment was made, they called more often. My mom started sending care packages like I was in college, again homemade cookies, random books she thought I'd like, a framed photo of Aaron and me, as kids. I didn't throw it out, but I didn't display it either. That photo wasn't a memory. It was a monument to fiction. Then came the family reunion. Aunt Linda's 70th. Big deal. Everyone was going. Even relatives I hadn't seen since middle school. At first, I said no, but my mother called me 3 days before. It would mean a lot to the family, she said, her voice unusually soft. The family, I repeated. Funny how I'm part of it again. She didn't argue. She just sighed. You're my son. That never changed. I didn't believe her, but I went. I don't know why. Maybe to test myself. Maybe to see what they'd do when I walked into a room and no longer needed their validation. The reunion was held at a lakeside estate rented for the weekend. Everyone was there. Laughter, champagne, picture-perfect children running barefoot on manicured grass. And then there was me, walking in like a ghost who'd come back in a suit. When people saw me, their eyes flickered recognition followed by surprise, then recalculation. I could see it happening in real time. He's here. Wait, he's the one who saved them. I kept my smile polite, my answers short. Yes, work's been good. No, I'm not married. Yes, I still live in the city. No, I haven't seen Aaron in a while. He was there too, of course. Avoiding me, like I was the IRS at one point, I caught him staring at me across the lawn. Our eyes met. And instead of nodding, instead of waving, I raised my glass. Just slightly. A toast to the golden boy who finally cracked, and the black sheep who learned to run the farm. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, My mom pulled me aside. She looked older than I remembered. Not in a way that makeup could fix. In a way that regret etches into skin. I know we didn't treat you the same, she said. I didn't reply. I waited, and I wish I could go back. Change that. Still, I said nothing. But I can't. I can only say thank you for what you did. You don't owe me thanks, I said finally. Just honesty. She nodded, eyes glassy. Aaron isn't doing well. The lawsuit's taking its toll. He's not used to failing. Neither was I said, but I didn't have anyone softening the fall. She reached for my hand. I see you now. I want you to know that. And for a second, just one, I almost let myself believe her. But the truth is, people often say they see you after you've proven your worth by their standards. When your value becomes obvious, financial, social, practical. But where were they when your value was invisible? When it lived in quiet resilience, in 4 a.m. shifts and empty pantries. That's what separates real love from performance. I left early that night, drove back to the city with the windows down, letting the wind erase the last traces of old ghosts. The next morning, I made a choice. I filed the paperwork to start my own foundations, something I'd dreamed about in secret for years. A non-profit dedicated to providing emergency funding for underrepresented students in STEM fields. Kids like me don't know family safety net. No golden boy treatment. Just raw potential and the fire to survive. I named it Second Son Fund. The irony didn't escape me, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop seeing second as a lesser place. Sometimes, second is where the strongest hearts are forged, and sometimes, the kid they forgot about becomes the one who refuses to let others be forgotten. I didn't expect the foundation to take off as fast as it did, but maybe that's the thing about doing something real. When it comes from pain, from experience, people feel it. They know it's not charity out of ego. It's restoration. It's someone reaching into the fire they once crawled out of and pulling others up with them. By the third month, the Second Son Fund had over 200 applicants, a handful of angel investors, and an unexpected feature in an online magazine that focused on modern philanthropy. I remember reading the article with a surreal kind of stillness, my name in bold print. My story condensed into a few paragraphs, but what they didn't print was the truth only I could carry. Like how I used to study in my car with the dome light on because I couldn't afford to heat my apartment, or how I'd hide in the university library just to delay going home, where silence was heavier than noise. Or how my brother once told me, without a flicker of irony, "You're the type that works hard. That's your thing," as if hard work were a consolation prize. As if he'd been born with wings and I was handed shovels. No one in my family donated to the fund, not a single cent. That told me more than any apology ever could. They were fine with me being the emergency rope so long as they didn't have to climb down into the well with me. But not everyone turned away. I started getting letters. Not emails, actual handwritten letters from students I'd never met. One of them, from a girl named Talia, said, "I almost dropped out this semester. My mom got laid off, and I was working 2 jobs just to cover books. I felt like I was drowning. Your grant didn't just pay my tuition. It told me someone out there sees me. I don't feel invisible anymore." I read it 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it in a box I kept by my desk. That box eventually filled up with stories like mine. Kids who had been overlooked, underestimated, expected to fail, and then, when they didn't, were met with confused praise, as if success without permission was offensive. And through them, I began to heal, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was building something. I wasn't fighting for a seat at someone else's table anymore. I was making my own. But healing is never linear, and some ghosts don't knock, they just walk right in. One evening, my dad showed up unannounced at my office. I hadn't seen him since the reunion. He looked, tired. Not in the way age makes you tired. In the way disappointment wears you out. I opened the door slowly. He gave me a faint smile and said, "You've done well." I didn't invite him to sit. I just leaned against the frame. He looked around, taking in the office, sleek, minimal, every detail hand-picked by me. "I read about the fund," he said. "Didn't realize it had grown so fast." I nodded, saying nothing. He shifted, eyes dropping. "Aaron's not good," he admitted. "He's seeing someone, a therapist. He barely speaks to your mother." I stayed still. I thought maybe you could talk to him. The absurdity of it struck me like a slap. Talk to him, I echoed. He looked up, surprised at the edge in my voice. You want me to reach out to the same brother who ignored me for 20 years? The one who let you treat me like an afterthought while he played Prince? My father didn't respond, so I kept going. You want me to fix him, the way I fixed you, is that it? His mouth opened, then closed. And in that silence, I realized something. He didn't know how to speak to me anymore. Not because he didn't care, but because I was no longer predictable. No longer manageable. No longer the quiet, obedient son who took scraps and smiled like they were gifts. I had become someone he couldn't control. And it scared him. I didn't come to burden you, he said finally. I came to say thank you. I raised an eyebrow. For what? For stepping up. For doing what none of us could. I waited, wondering if he'd finally say it, but he didn't single quotes T. No, I'm sorry. No, we were wrong. Just a pat on the back in the shape of gratitude. I'm not angry anymore, I said, surprising even myself. But I'm not your son the way I used to be. He looked confused. I explained. You loved me conditionally. You respected me when it was useful. I've outgrown that version of family. He flinched. I'm not punishing you, I continued, but I'm protecting myself. If you want a relationship now, it'll be on my terms. He nodded. But it was hollow. We both knew this was a kind of ending, or maybe a new beginning with different rules. He left quietly and I sat alone again, not in sadness but in clarity, because something changes. When you stop needing them to understand you, when your peace is no longer a reward, they can give or take. I used to think family was blood. Now, I believe family is recognition. And sometimes, it's strangers who recognize your soul long before the people who raised you do. I went home that night and added a new scholarship to the fund. It would go to students who had been legally emancipated from their families. Its name, the unclaimed award for the ones who had to become their own proof. Because I had, and I was done apologizing for it. I didn't expect Aaron to call. But then again, I never expected him to need me. When his name lit up on my screen, a few weeks after Dad's visit, my stomach knotted with something I couldn't quite name. Not anger. Not fear. Grief. Maybe for a version of brotherhood we never had. I let it ring twice before answering. Hey, he said, voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Hey, I replied, calm but guarded. There was a long pause. I could hear traffic in the background. The muffled hum of the world moving on around him. I know I'm the last person you probably want to hear from. He started, and I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. You're not wrong, I said quietly. Another pause. I messed up, he said. I was the golden boy, and I acted like it. Not just acted, I cut in. You enjoyed it. You let them pit us against each other, and you never once said it wasn't fair. He didn't argue. That surprised me. I was afraid, he said after a moment. Afraid that if I questioned it, I'd lose what I had. The attention, the praise, the safety net. And I was afraid of never being enough. I shot back. And you confirmed that fear every time you looked through me at the dinner table. His breath caught. That sound, it didn't come from shame. It came from recognition. I don't deserve forgiveness, he whispered. I stayed silent. Because it wasn't about what he deserved, it was about what I needed. I'm not asking to be close again, he said. I want to stop pretending we didn't hurt each other. And there it was, the first step of something real. Not a reunion. Not a redemption arc. Just two men, grown now, standing in the ashes of a broken childhood, deciding whether to sweep or rebuild. Then don't pretend, I told him. But don't expect comfort from me either. I'm not the soft place to land. He let out a shaky breath. That's fair. We talked for a little while longer about nothing much. His therapy sessions. His failing marriage. How our mother had started watching my interviews but never mentioned them out loud. I told him about the fund. About the students. About TALIA. And for the first time in our lives, he listened without making it about himself. It was unsettling. And, strangely, healing. When we hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there, letting the quiet be enough. Because I wasn't chasing his approval anymore. And that in itself felt like victory. Things started shifting after that. Not with fireworks, not with dramatic apologies, but in quiet, unspoken ways. My mother began sending me articles she thought I'd like. No words, just links. Aaron sent a birthday card for the first time since I was 16. My father didn't visit again, but he donated anonymously to the fund. I knew it was him because the donation was exactly $1.112. My birthday. It wasn't love. Not yet, but maybe it was the language they could speak. I didn't forgive them, but I stopped bleeding for them, too. And that was more valuable than any apology. One afternoon, I was invited to speak at a panel in New York about generational trauma and success. Not the usual corporate talk. This one was raw, personal, meant for people like me, people who had built their homes out of what their families had thrown away. I stood on that stage, heart pounding in my chest, and looked out at the sea of young faces, some eager, some exhausted, all of them searching for a version of hope that felt real, and I told them the truth. About the dinner tables where my voice didn't matter. About the birthdays that were forgotten. About watching my brother walk on water while I was made to drown quietly. I told them about how I had learned to swim silently, furiously, and alone, and how one day I realized I didn't have to swim back to them. I could just keep going. The applause was thunderous, but it was a girl, in the second row, barely 20, with tired eyes and a brave smile, who walked up to me after and said, "Thank you for saying what no one else would." And in that moment, I understood something. I wasn't just healing. I was rewriting, not just my own story, but the ones they would tell themselves after me. I wasn't the second son anymore. I was the first flame, and they were following the fire. A few weeks later, I got a call from a corporate law firm. Big name, huge. They wanted me to consult on a diversity project and to speak at their leadership retreat. Their founder, Aaron's mentor, the same man who once told our parents that Aaron was the best thing that ever happened to their name. Funny how things come around. I told them I'd check my schedule. Then I sat back, sipping tea from a chipped mug I refused to replace because it reminded me of where I started, and I smiled. Not from spite, but from something deeper. I had stopped waiting for them to see me, and I had learned how to be seen by the world instead. The day I signed the deal with that law firm, I didn't even flinch when I saw Aaron's mentor's name on the dotted line. There was a time years ago when I would have felt nervous, maybe even ashamed, like I was stepping into someone else's world wearing a suit too big for me. But now, that suit was tailored, the world was mine, and I wasn't borrowing anything anymore. They flew me out to Boston for the weekend retreat, first class of course. They even offered to send a car for me. I declined. I preferred to arrive on my own terms. When I walked into that glossy glass tower of polished egos and power lunches, I didn't look for validation, I looked for impact. I was there to disrupt something, and they knew it. In the keynote, I didn't sugarcoat a damn thing. I talked about the quiet violence of being underestimated. About how many kids like me got left behind because we didn't speak the language of the golden sons. I told them how resilience wasn't a buzzword, it was what you learned when nobody came to pick you up after you fell. And when the room rose to their feet in applause, I didn't hear noise. I heard recognition. And that was louder than any praise my family ever gave Aaron. After the talk, Mr. Wexler, the mentor, approached me. He was older now, softer, maybe. His arrogance had folded into something more measured, more calculating. "You're Malcolm, right?" he said, extending a hand. I shook it firmly. "I remember your brother spoke very highly of you. Back then, of course," he added, as if trying to recover from a false memory. I smiled. "That's generous. He spent most of our childhood pretending I didn't exist." He chuckled, unsure if it was a joke. I didn't clarify. Then he looked at me like someone just realizing the understudy had stolen the spotlight. "You've done well for yourself?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That night, I dined alone by choice, no networking, no fake small talk. Just me, a book, and the skyline. I didn't need anyone to witness the moment to make it real. I already knew what I'd built. Back home, I returned to a rhythm that felt both familiar and entirely new. My nonprofit was thriving. We had just closed on a second building. Mentorship programs were expanding. Former students were coming back to volunteer, to teach, to give back. One of them, Julian, stopped by my office one afternoon with a gift-framed photograph of the first cohort of scholars, all smiling like they had something to prove. "You started this," he said, "because they didn't see you. But we do." I looked at that photo long after he left, and for the first time, the past didn't feel like a wound. It felt like fuel. I didn't need to erase what happened, I just needed to outrun it. And I had. My mother called one day in early spring. Not a text, not a half-hearted email. A real phone call. It had been months since we'd spoken. She didn't ask about work. Didn't mention the panel or the articles about me that had started showing up in business journals. Instead, she said, "We're thinking of selling the house." I waited. She didn't elaborate, but I could hear it beneath the surface. They needed money. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. "You're asking if I'll help, aren't you?" Silence. Then, "I didn't want to, but you are, Mom? I just thought, maybe after everything, you'd want to preserve the house. You grew up there." I laughed. Not bitterly, just honestly. "The only thing I want to preserve," I said, "is my peace." There it was finally, spoken out loud. Not as a threat, just a truth. She went quiet. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "We were wrong about you." I let that hang in the air. Because it wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a crack. And cracks let the light in. "I know," I said softly. "I've always known." She didn't ask again. At least not that day. But the door once slammed shut had opened a sliver. Aaron visited not long after that. Unannounced, he showed up at my office with a coffee and an apology. "You still take it black?" he asked, holding the cup like a peace offering. I stared at it. "I take it with boundaries." Now he laughed, nervous. "Fair." He looked around my office, eyes landing on the award plaques, the student artwork, the framed letter from the mayor. Then he turned to me. "I used to think I was successful because I had a title. You've got people." I nodded. "You used to think success was being named heir to the kingdom. I built my own." He looked away, and for once, I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel anything but clarity. "You didn't just prove everyone wrong," he said. "You became what they never imagined." "No," I replied. "I became what I imagined." He left not long after that. No demands. No guilt, just a quiet acknowledgement that I had changed the shape of the story we were all born into, and he couldn't rewrite that tonally, watch it unfold. Sometimes, I still pass by that old neighborhood. The house, the cracked driveway, the mailbox with the crooked hinge, but I never stop, because I've already left the past behind. I didn't come back to knock, I came back to build better doors for those who never had keys to begin with, and I've been holding them open ever since. They say time heals all wounds. But I don't think that's true. Time teaches you how to carry them, how to stop bleeding every time someone mentions your brother's name, how to stop flinching when your mom sends a family photo with you cropped at the edge of it all, how to walk into rooms you were once locked out of, and not even want a seat at their table, because now, I own the building. And yet, healing didn't come from success. It came from the people who saw me not as a backup, not as a disappointment, but as a whole damn force. Like Nadine, she started as a receptionist at our nonprofit, juggling 2 jobs and a toddler. Most would have overlooked her. But I remembered what it felt like to be overlooked, so I asked her to shadow me, gave her a stipend to attend workshops. Today, she's our director of operations. She signs checks now, approves budgets, holds meetings, and when someone tries to dismiss her, she smiles and says, "Talk to my boss." Oh wait, that's me. And then there's Elijah. A foster kid with a temper and a file thicker than a phone book. When he first came in, he said, "People don't help me. They handle me." I said, "Then let's be the first." He's applying to colleges now, wants to study urban planning. Said he wants to build spaces where kids like him don't have to ask for permission to feel safe. Every time I see him, I think, this is what legacy looks like. Not titles, not trophies, but transformation. The local news did a profile on us that summer. They called me the community's quiet architect. It aired the same night my family hosted a gathering for Aaron's promotion. He'd made partner at his firm, and for the first time ever, I didn't feel like I was missing out. Because when the reporter asked me, "What drives you to keep going?" I didn't even hesitate. I said, every time someone told me I wasn't enough, I planted a seed in that soil. And look now, it's a forest. It went viral, and not because of me, because it spoke to everybody who'd ever been told to sit down, be quiet, be grateful, be less. A week later, my father showed up, not with excuses, not with demands, but with a folder. Inside was a letter, handwritten. He sat across from me in my office, same man who once said I was just not built for success. Now, he looked like someone trying to rewrite a history that had already been printed. "I've been watching," he said quietly. I didn't understand, back then. "You weren't loud about your success." "No," I said. "Because I didn't need applause. I needed impact." He nodded, opened the folder. The letter was clumsy, hesitant, but it tried. And that meant more than he knew. He wrote, "I didn't know how to love a son who didn't look like the one I imagined. But you taught me how to see the one I had. I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. I just exhaled because for once, it wasn't about me needing him to change. It was about me changing in spite of him. I can't undo how we treated you." He said. "You don't need to," I replied. "Just don't treat the next generation like that." He left that day without asking for money, for favors, for attention, just left. And for the first time, the silence he left behind didn't feel heavy. It felt clean. Aaron reached out. Again, this time with something different, humility. He said, "I'm stepping away from the firm for a while." I raised an eyebrow. "Burnout. Guilt," he said. "I spent so long performing success that I forgot to define it." I offered, "No comfort, just a truth. Success isn't a stage, it's a shelter. If you're not building it for others, it's empty." He nodded slowly. "That's why I want in. I want to help with the foundation." I was skeptical. Of course I was. But I didn't say no, because part of being strong is knowing when to set boundaries, and part of being whole is knowing when to let someone try again. With conditions, at the next board meeting, I introduced Aaron not as my brother, not as the golden child, but as our new development consultant. I watched him listen more than he talked. I watched him take notes, ask questions, defer to people who knew better. And when the meeting ended, he turned to me and said, "This is harder than I thought." I smiled. "Now imagine doing it while everyone assumed you'd fail." He laughed. "This time, I owe you more than I can say." I didn't let him finish. "You don't owe me," I said. "You owe you. Be someone you can be proud of." Later that month, we hosted our annual gala. I walked into the ballroom with Nadine on one arm and Elijah standing proudly beside the mayor. Reporters flashed cameras. Donors raised glasses. But what caught my eye was Aaron, standing quietly, near the back, next to our parents, and this time, they weren't looking at him, they were looking at me, not with pity, not with surprise, with something resembling awe. But it didn't matter because I had already learned. I was never the forgotten one. I was just the quiet storm they didn't hear coming. And now, I wasn't waiting for their permission to shine. I was the light. You ever notice how silence changes depending on who's holding it? When I used to sit at that dinner table, bosun, voice low, invisible under the weight of their expectations, silence felt like shame, like I wasn't worth speaking to, like even my words would be a waste of air. But now I carry silence like armor. I choose when to speak, and more importantly, I choose when not to. That gala was the first time my mother didn't try to fix my hair or suggest a different tie. She didn't say, "You should smile more," or "Don't embarrass yourself." She just looked at me, like she was seeing something for the first time. "You've changed," she said under her breath, as the crowd parted to let me through. "No," I answered calmly. "I just stopped hiding." And I think that hit her harder than anything else I could have said. That night, I gave a speech. Not the longest, not the flashiest, but the truest. I used to think success was something you had to chase. I began. Something far away, glittering in the hands of people who looked like they belonged. I paused, let the silence settle. But success is not a trophy. It's not an award. It's not even a bank balance. It's knowing deep in your bones that you did not become bitter, even when you had every right to be. I looked at the crowd, but my eyes found my brother and my parents. It's choosing compassion over vengeance, purpose over performance, and truth over comfort. And then, slowly, deliberately, I added, it's building the kind of life that doesn't require anyone else's permission. The applause wasn't thunderous, it was soulful, the kind you feel behind your ribs. After the gala, people I hadn't heard from in years reached out. Cousins who once laughed when I dropped out of college, aunties who used to brag about Aaron at every wedding, now asking how they could donate. Even teachers who once said I lacked ambition were inviting me to speak at career days. It was flattering, sure, but it also felt hollow, because I hadn't built all of this for them. I'd built it for the kid I used to be, the one who'd sit at the top of the stairs during family parties, hoping someone would call him down. The one who taught himself how to apply for jobs because no one had time. The one who wore hand-me-down suits to interviews and still smiled when they asked if he was the assistant. That kid. He was the reason I kept showing up, and now, he had a kingdom. A few months later, my father asked me to lunch. Just the two of us. He was different now. Softer, maybe. Not in a weak wage. Humbled. He didn't talk about stocks or Aaron's firm or who just bought a second home in the Hamptons. He asked about me. What are you working on now? I told him about our expansion program, how we were launching an incubator for first-gen founders, people who had vision but no connections. He nodded, impressed. You always had that stubborn streak. I used to think it was a flaw. It was survival, I corrected, and to my surprise, he didn't argue. He leaned forward. I want to invest, he said. I blinked. In the program. In you. And for a moment, I didn't know what to say. Because it wasn't the money that surprised me. It was the way he said it. No strings. No condescension. Just belief. Of course, I set clear terms. A donation, not ownership. He'd get no control, no sway over hiring or messaging. He agreed, and when he handed me the check, he looked me in the eye and said, "You were always more than I gave you credit for. Now you know." I said. Not cruel, not triumphant, just true. Aaron kept showing up to not in some big, performative way. He took on grunt work at the foundation, showed up early, sat in community circles, listened when kids opened up about their pain. One night I found him sitting alone in the office kitchen, staring at an old group photo. "That's you, right?" he asked, pointing at the corner. I nodded. "You always stood at the edge of things," he said. "That's where I was placed." He looked up. "I'm sorry. I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't, but I said, thank you." Our relationship didn't magically heal. We weren't suddenly best friends, but we found rhythm and respect. That was enough. My mother, too, began asking more questions, not about what I did, but how I felt. That alone felt like a miracle. She started volunteering once a week at our food drive, said it made her feel useful again. I told her she always was. She cried, so did I. But the biggest moment came from someone else entirely. A woman named Patricia. She had been one of our scholarship recipients. Single mom, nursing student. She asked to meet me, said it was urgent. When we sat down, she handed me a photo of her and her daughter in a new apartment. "You did this," she said. "Not just the money. You gave me dignity." I looked at the photo, then at her. "You did it," I replied. "I just cleared the noise." She took my hand. "No. You reminded me that the person I was didn't have to define who I'd become." That's when I knew. This wasn't just my redemption story, it was a reclamation. Every time they doubted me, I built something stronger. Every time they left me out, I created my own table. And now, that table feeds hundreds. Every week, every month, every damn year. I'm not interested in revenge anymore. I'm interested in legacy, because the greatest way to silence the people who once said, "You'll never be enough," is to live in such a way that they wouldn't dare say it again. And, even if they did, you wouldn't need to answer. Your work would do it for you. There's something strange about peace when you're not used to it. I'd spent so long holding my breath, bracing for the next jab, the next dismissive laugh, the next family gathering where I was an afterthought, that when the noise finally stopped, I didn't know what to do with the quiet. No fire to put out, no expectation to fail under, just stillness. But stillness can feel like space, and space can become freedom. It was in that freedom I started dreaming differently, not about proving myself. Those days were over now. I dreamed about building something that would outlast me, not as a monument to success, but as evidence that people like me, overlooked, underestimated, discarded, could not only survive, but shape the world, and we were. My foundation had grown beyond what I could have imagined in those early days of couch hopping and instant noodles. We had mentorship programs, mental health services, microgrants for women-led businesses, and tech apprenticeships for kids whose schools had no computer labs. People started calling us a movement. I never wanted that label. Movements are trendy. What we had was momentum, and momentum isn't loud. It's patient, consistent, unshakable. The kind of power that doesn't demand attention but draws it anyway. That year, I was invited to speak at a university that had once rejected my application. The irony didn't escape me. As I stepped onto that stage, I looked out over a sea of young faces, some eager, some afraid, many who looked like I used to. "I'm not here to inspire you," I began. They blinked, surprised. "I'm here to remind you that your past does not have veto power over your future. That family doesn't have to mean loyalty to pain. That being underestimated is not a curse, it's a license to shock the world." I didn't rehearse those words. They came from the scar tissue. From the long nights of holding rejection letters in one hand and hope in the other. From watching my brother get praised for doing half the work, while I got scolded for breathing too loud. From learning that forgiveness doesn't mean access, that love doesn't mean obligation, that boundaries are a gift, not a punishment. The applause that day wasn't the reward. It was the echo of everyone in that room realizing they weren't alone. Later that evening, I sat in the university courtyard alone. A woman in her 60s approached me, holding a crumpled program. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "I'm one of the janitors here. I heard your speech while cleaning the back hall." I smiled. "Thank you for listening." She hesitated. "My daughter. She stopped speaking to me 5 years ago. Said I never supported her dreams." My chest tightened. "Did you?" I asked gently. She nodded slowly. "I didn't understand them. I wanted her safe, not successful." "There's a difference, isn't there?" I nodded back. "There is." She looked down at the program, then back up. "I think I'll write her. Tell her I was wrong." It hit me then how far-reaching pain travels. And how far-reaching healing can too. Even when it comes years late, even when it's imperfect. Meanwhile, my family had become quieter, not cold, just aware. The way people are when they realize they might not be the main character anymore. Aaron no longer wore his favorite son like a badge. He started referring to me as his co-founder, even in interviews. Sometimes, I caught a flicker of guilt in his face when he introduced me, but I never used that guilt against him. Because my story wasn't about dragging anyone down, it was about rising anyway. My parents, especially my mother, had shifted too. I think seeing other people respect me, revere me even, finally cracked something open. One night, as she folded donation letters at the kitchen table, she said quietly, "I used to worry you'd resent us." I looked at her, heart steady. I did. She flinched, but I also turned that resentment into fuel. She stared at me, then reached for my hand. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. I didn't cry. But my younger self, the one buried under years of invisibility, probably did. One of the final pieces of closure came not with words, but with a signature. I signed the final deed for a new property, an old library. We were converting into a community hub. I stood there alone, in the echo of marble walls and dust-covered shelves, and thought, this is what legacy feels like. Not press releases, not awards, but spaces, safe spaces. For people like me. For people nothing like me. For people who've been told their stories don't matter. I ran my fingers across the table. I mattered, I whispered to the silence. And for once, the silence agreed. You see, when your story begins with being overlooked, there's a special kind of power in making sure others are seen. When you've been ignored, lifting someone else's voice becomes holy work. When you've been denied softness, creating it for others becomes sacred. That's what I do now. Not to make up for the past, but to transcend it. Because your family doesn't get the final word on who you are, you do, and the louder you speak your truth, the harder it becomes for the world to pretend you were ever silent. It happened on a Tuesday. Just a regular Tuesday. The kind of day where emails pile up, coffee goes cold too fast, and you think nothing significant could possibly unfold. But it did. That morning, I received a call from a man named Michael Ellisons, EEO of a global venture philanthropy firm, someone I had admired from afar, whose organization had poured millions into projects like mine across the globe. "I've been following your work," he said, voice clipped, British, direct. "I think it's time we met." 3 weeks later, I found myself in London, seated across from him in a polished glass office overlooking the Thames. He wasn't just interested in funding us, he wanted to partner with us, to expand what we'd built to new cities, even new continents. And then he said the words that spun everything. "We're preparing to launch a $100 million impact fund. I want you to co-chair it." I remember blinking. Not out of shock at the number, but because for once I didn't feel like an imposter hearing it. I felt ready. I said yes. When I flew back to the States, everything looked different. Same skyline, same streetlights, but something in me had shifted. It wasn't just success anymore, it was scale. I could see farther than I'd ever been allowed to dream, and yet, life has a way of dragging the past back to the table, just when you think you've finally cleared it, because 2 weeks later, my parents called not separately, dashed together. It had been years since that happened. My stomach tightened. Dad's voice came through first. "Hey, listen, we need to talk about something." They were in trouble. Deep financial trouble again. And this time, it wasn't medical bills. It wasn't a failed investment, it was Aaron. He had co-signed a deal with a friend, some new fintech startup. It imploded hard. They were looking at millions in liability, and the vultures were circling. I know you and your brother aren't close, my mother said, her voice shaky, but this is the family. We need you. I felt my heartbeat slow. That old anger stirred. That sharp, clean ache of being useful only when it served them, not when I begged for help. Not when I ate rice and ketchup for a week to pay rent. Not when they watched Aaron succeed and nodded proudly, while I worked 2 jobs and cried in my bathroom. Now they saw me as a solution, as a bank account, as a final hope. I could have said no. Part of me wanted to, just to watch their pride crumble. To hear the panic in their voices. To give them the same cold silence they once gave me. But I didn't. I met with Aaron. We sat at the same family dining table where, years ago, he got his graduation party with the cake and streamers and speeches, and I got boxed leftovers on a plastic plate. He looked thinner now, ashamed. I didn't come here for forgiveness, he said, just transparency. He explained everything, every bad decision, every moment he tried to fix it himself. The risks, the shortcuts, the crash. Then he looked me dead in the eye. You don't owe us anything, he said. But I had to try. You're the only one who might know how to fix it. There it was. Not manipulation, not guilt. Respect by the first time. My brother saw me not as his shadow but as someone who had become more than he ever imagined. I leaned back. I'll help, I said. But on my terms. Full oversight. I choose the lawyers. The restructure plan goes through me. You'll sign your assets into temporary escrow. And if anyone hides anything, I walk. He didn't flinch, he just nodded. Deal. I handled the debt, not by writing a check, but by restructuring the startup's remains, spinning off viable IP, and negotiating a complex buyout through one of my foundation's corporate partners. It wasn't flashy, it was surgical. I didn't save Aaron. I salvaged what was left, and in doing so, I did what none of them ever expected me to be capable of. I rescued the family. The same family who once left me behind. The same family who once said, "You're not like your brother." They were right. I wasn't. I was something else entirely. A week after the final documents were signed, my parents invited me to dinner. No agenda, no hidden ask, just dinner. The food was warm, homemade, there was no cake, no grand gesture. But when my father raised his glass and said, "To our daughter," there was a quiver in his voice. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. His eyes did. You know, some people think revenge is about punishment. But the sweetest revenge is building a life so undeniable that it forces the world to reevaluate every assumption it ever made about you. Success isn't spite, it's sovereignty. It's choosing to rise, not because they deserve your forgiveness, but because you deserve your peace. And when the people who once called you too much, or not enough, or not like your brother, finally look at you with awe, you realize they didn't just underestimate you. They underestimated your capacity to lead, to forgive, to win. I didn't move back in with them. Let's make that clear. There was no dramatic family reunion. No warm Sunday breakfasts or cozy holidays. Spent wrapped in forgiveness. That's not how healing works. Not when the wound was silence. Not when the ache was years of being overlooked, used only when convenient, then shelved again like an old coat. But I did let them in. Just a little. I answered their calls. I showed up sometimes, and when Mom sent pictures of her garden, or Dad forwarded one of those corny chain emails, I didn't roll my eyes or hit delete. I replied. Because I wasn't holding the past like a weapon anymore. I didn't need to. Power doesn't shout. It whispers from the quiet confidence of knowing you made it. In spite of everything, Aaron was different. Not suddenly warm or poetic, but quieter, more measured. He apologized again one afternoon while we walked around my community center's new tech lab, a sleek, sunlit space built with part of the Ellison Fund. I used to think I was the one carrying the family name, he said, slowly. Turns out I was just lucky to go first. I stopped walking. That sentence hit something deep. He had always been the golden child. The example, the one whose name got attached to scholarships, to good news, to pride. But maybe what they never saw was that going first doesn't mean going furthest. Sometimes the real legacy is built not in the spotlight, but in the shadows, with grit and stubborn hope. I don't resent you anymore, I told him. He looked surprised. You ever did? I smiled faintly. Not you. Exactly. Just the way everything always bent around you. Like I was born on the edge of your orbit. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I think I was just scared of what you'd become if they hadn't clipped your wings so early. There it was. The first honest truth between siblings in over a decade. Funny how a single sentence can stitch 1,000 frayed threads. We still weren't best friends. But we were something real. Something earned. A year passed. Then two. The center grew. We opened in Detroit. Then Newark. Then Manchester. Each launch was its own symphony, months of planning. Hundreds of hands. Thousands of lives. But none of it compared to that day. The day they came, my parents, Aaron, even Uncle Rick, and Aunt Diane, who used to call my work a phase. They came to the New York expansion gala. All dressed up. Mom wore navy with pearls. Her hair pinned like she was attending a royal banquet. Dad had a pocket square, for God's sake, and me. I walked on stage to introduce our keynote, Michael Ellison, himself, and watched as their jaws dropped, seeing the crowd rise. When I took the mic, my name echoed in the room. Not Aaron's, not my father's. Mine. That moment didn't heal everything, but it corrected the record, and sometimes, that's enough. The next day, we had breakfast at a little place on the Hudson. Quiet. No press. No posing. Just family, whatever version of that we were becoming. At one point, Dad reached across the table, placed his hand over mine, and said softly, You did good. Not we're proud. Not thank you. Just you did good. And somehow, that felt cleaner. More real. Because he wasn't trying to rewrite the past. He was finally seeing the present. You know. It's strange how people don't realize how deeply they can shape someone with a shrug. A look. A word. How long those wounds live. But stranger still is how powerful it feels to outgrow the need for their validation. I used to chase it like oxygen. Now I build air for others to breathe. I mentor girls who were told their ideas were too ambitious. I sit on scholarship boards that ask about grit, not just grades. I invest in young creators who remind me of who I was before the world tried to cut me down to size. I didn't just make it, I made space. And that's what you don't always see in stories like mine. It's not just about proving them wrong, it's about proving yourself right. You were never too much. You were never asking for too many chances. You just needed one door to stay open long enough for you to walk through. And once you did, you built a whole damn building. So if you're listening to this wondering if your silence will ever speak louder than their doubt, let me be the one to say, it will. It already does, because survival is a quiet rebellion. But success is your name in lights they said you'd never touch. And when they finally see it, don't gloat, just smile, and let them sit in the echo of every moment they underestimated you. There's this thing that happens when your success becomes undeniable. People start rewriting the past. Like it was always obvious. Like they knew you'd make it. Like their silence was letting you grow. It's subtle, slippery. You'll hear things like, we always believed in you. We just didn't want to pressure you. You were always the smart one, the quiet storm. We knew you needed time to find your way. They'll say it with soft eyes, gentle voices, as if they weren't the ones who closed the door in your face, as if they hadn't measured your worth in comparison to someone else's trajectory. In my case, Aaron's. And the funny thing is, they almost made me believe it. That maybe I was the one who missed. That maybe their indifference was just tough love. That maybe it wasn't so bad. But I keep a journal. For poetry. Not even for healing. I keep it for clarity. In its pages are the dates. The words, the moments no one else saw fit to remember. Like, the time I got accepted to a pre-college engineering camp and Mom said, that's great, honey. Then asked Aaron what he wanted for dinner that night. Or when I used to ride the bus 2 hours to work at the auto shop, while Aaron got a car, from Dad to encourage his independence. Or how, when I launched my first app, it took 3 months before anyone in my family downloaded it, and, even then, it was because a neighbor mentioned it at church. No. I didn't misremember. They just weren't watching, until everyone else was. Here's what they don't tell you about being the underdog who wins. Success doesn't heal your childhood. It doesn't make the loneliness worth it. It doesn't turn the bullies into believers, it just changes the power dynamic. Before I was the one waiting by the door. Now they're knocking on mine. But I don't let everyone in. I can't, because with success comes a different kind of grief. Grieving the version of your family you thought you might earn if only you were good enough, loud enough, valuable enough. But the truth, that version never existed. What exists now is me. Whole. Not because they came around, but because I stopped bending. I remember the first time I really noticed the shift. It was at Aaron's birthday. He wanted something low-key, just family and a few friends. We had dinner at this upscale steakhouse in the city, the kind of place with dim lighting and waiters who remember your wine preference. There were maybe 15 of us at the table, everyone laughing, passing plates, the usual noise, and then Aaron said without warning, "You all realize Sarah's the reason none of us are bankrupt right now, right?" The table went quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. "I mean it," he continued, looking around. "We were drowning. Mom and Dad were too proud to ask for help. I was too clueless to realize how bad it had gotten. And Sarah," he looked at me then, "she didn't just bail us out. She built a foundation under us." Someone raised a glass. Others followed. I didn't cry. I didn't even smile wide. But I nodded once, and in that moment, for the first time ever, I felt seen without having to perform. That's the real victory, isn't it? Not just the money, not the status, or the title, but the quiet knowing that you no longer need their applause to validate your existence. Because now, I applaud myself. But let me be clear, I still have boundaries. I don't loan large amounts anymore unless it's a structured investment. I don't show up to every family function. I don't answer every call. Not out of bitterness, out of discipline. Because loving them doesn't mean erasing the years I spent loving myself alone. And forgiveness. That's not a get out of accountability free card. It's a doorway I open on my terms. I built something my family couldn't even imagine. And I did it with the parts of myself they used to dismiss: the stubbornness, the quiet, the endless questions, the too much thinking. They told me those traits were liabilities. Turns out, they were my currency, and now I spend it freely on others. The ones who don't have cheerleaders. The ones who walk through the same fire and come out burning with ambition, but no place to put it. I give them tools. I give them a map. I give them the words I never heard at their age. You are not behind. You are not small. You are not invisible. You are becoming, and one day, you'll make them all look again. Not to gloat, but to witness, because your light won't ask for permission, it'll demand recognition. It's strange, the things people remember you for. Sometimes, they remember the awards, the headlines, the donation drives, the sleek buildings bearing your name, but the moments that built me, they were never televised, they happened in silence. Like the night I stayed up redesigning my nonprofit's outreach model after a funding partner pulled out without warning. No one saw that. Or the morning I had to choose between paying myself a salary or hiring 2 interns who reminded me too much of who I once was. No one clapped for that either, but those were the moments I grew. Not when I made it to the Forbes list. Not when I shook hands with a senator. But when I said no to being safe, and yes to building something that might outlive me. My mother asked me once quietly, while we were watering her hydrangeas in the backyard, what kept me going all those years. I didn't say bitterness. I didn't say rage. I said clarity. I knew exactly what kind of life I didn't want. I told her, one where I waited for someone else to see me, one where I measured my worth by who clapped when I succeeded. So instead, I clapped for myself, loud, every damn day. And the irony, once I stopped seeking their applause, they started offering it. At first, cautiously. A shared post here, a proud remark there, a warm introduction at a cousin's wedding, but slowly, it grew now. They call me when they want to brag. When a neighbor brings up my name, when their coworkers mention our foundation's work, it used to sting. Like now you're proud. Now that the work has turned shiny enough for you to show off. But the sting passed, because I realized their pride wasn't about me. It was about their proximity to something others admired. They hadn't changed that much. I no longer needed them to be different in order for me to be whole. I once read that healing doesn't always mean going back to how things were. Sometimes, it's about letting things be exactly what they are and choosing peace anyway. That's where I am now. My family and I, we exist in a delicate truce. They've stopped trying to explain the past. I've stopped asking them to. We don't dwell, but we don't pretend, either. And that, strange as it sounds, is progress. Aaron and I talk more now than we ever did growing up. It's funny. We're closer now that we're no longer competing for the same spotlight. I think he respects me in a way he never could when I was living in his shadow. He's the one who convinced me to write my story down. People need to hear it, he said. Not just the success, the fight, the silence. The stuff no one claps for. So here I am writing for the kid I used to be. The one sitting on the stairs, overhearing conversations that weren't meant for her ears. The one who got left off email chains. Who learned how to smile while folding away disappointment like laundry. The one who learned not to ask for too much. If you're him, then let me say this: you're not too much. You were never too much. They just weren't enough to hold what you were becoming. I don't believe success is the best revenge. You know what is? Peace. That deep-rooted calm that says, I don't need to prove anything anymore. I am the proof. Last week, I sat in the back of a workshop my foundation ran for underprivileged teens in Baltimore. They were learning to code. One girl, maybe 15. Braids, fierce eyes, raised her hand and asked the instructor, "What if your family doesn't believe in you?" And the instructor, without skipping a beat, said, "Then you believe in yourself until the room has no choice but to catch up." The girl nodded, but her eyes flicked back to me. I caught her gaze, and I smiled. Because I knew exactly where she was, sitting in the shadow of someone else's expectations, trying to build a future with tools no one bothered to give her. And I also knew she was going to make it, not just because of the workshop, but because someone in that room finally heard. And sometimes, being seen just once is all it takes to change everything. Somewhere along the way, I stopped asking, why didn't they love me like they loved him? And started asking, why did I spend so long trying to earn what should have been freely given? That shift. It saved me, because when you stop chasing love in places it's been withheld, you begin to build a world where you are the source, not of pain, but of power. And with that power, I did something unexpected. I forgave them, not with grand declarations or teary reunions, not with family therapy or rehearsed apologies. No, I forgave them in the most radical way I knew. By living well and letting go of the narrative that their validation completed me. It was hardest with Mom. She aged in quiet ways. Her hands slowed, her voice softened, her stories got longer, and sometimes the timelines blurred. One day, she sat beside me on the porch, watching the sun drop below the trees, and she said, "I didn't know how to mother you." I turned to her, startled. She didn't look at me. She just kept talking. "You were so different." Aaron was loud, easy to praise. You were quiet, always thinking, always building something in your head. I didn't understand it, so I thought ignoring it would make it go away. It wasn't an apology. Not quite, but it was true. And somehow, that mattered more. I didn't say, "It's okay," because it wasn't. I didn't say, "I understand," because some wounds don't need understanding, they need acknowledgement. I just said, "Thank you," and we sat there. Together, not healed, not whole, but human, and for the first time in a long time. That was enough. Aaron came to me, a month later, nervous. He wanted help. Not money this time. Not publicity. Not even a favor. He wanted guidance. "I want to start something of my own," he said, "but I don't want it to ride on your name." That surprised me. I looked at him not as the golden boy, not as my past tormentor, but as a man trying to step out of a mold he'd outgrown. And I realized something. We were both trapped once, me, in invisibility, him, in a spotlight that never allowed failure. We were raised to compete, not connect. But here we were, finally seeing each other not as rivals, but as survivors. So I helped him not because I owed him, but because I chose to. That's what real power is. The freedom to choose grace, even when the world didn't give it to you. There's a boy in our mentorship program who reminds me of me. His name's Malik. Smart, observant, speaks only when it matters. One day he asked me, "Were you always this strong?" I laughed. No one is always strong. Strength isn't a trait, it's a decision. A choice to stand up, even after being ignored. A choice to speak, even when silence is safer. A choice to believe in a future no one else can see yet. I wasn't always strong, I told him. But I never stopped choosing myself. He nodded slowly, and I could see it. That moment when a story becomes a mirror. When someone else's survival becomes your permission slip. I used to think the prize was proving them wrong, but the real prize, becoming someone I'm proud of. Someone who doesn't need to be clapped for to feel seen. Someone who doesn't confuse silence for shame. Someone who knows that being overlooked doesn't mean being unworthy. And that's what I try to give back. Not money, not even opportunities, but mirror moments. Tiny windows into a life that says, yes, you were unseen, but not unworthy. Yes, they picked someone else. But you're still here. Yes, you were underestimated. But only until you bloomed. My family isn't perfect. Neither am I, but I've rewritten the story. Not to erase the pain, but to give it purpose, because I know now. You don't need a perfect past to have a powerful future. All you need is to stop waiting for them to see you, and start building a life where you finally do. The thing no one tells you about rising up from the ashes is this: not everyone will celebrate your rebirth. Some will stay haunted by the version of you they buried. The one who stayed quiet. The one who didn't challenge the pecking order. The one who let love come in scraps and mistook it for a feast. But I'm not her anymore. I am the woman who rebuilt her life from silence. Who carved dignity out of neglect. Who walked away from empty tables and built her own with room for others who know what it's like to be the afterthought. I used to dream about being accepted by my family. Now I build legacies instead of begging for inclusion. At the groundbreaking ceremony for our community health center, I gave a short speech. Mom and Dad were there. So was Aaron. So were local officials, volunteers, families, teens I once mentored. A crowd of strangers who had somehow become mine. I looked out over them all, and I didn't feel bitterness. I didn't feel triumph. I felt stillness, like I had finally come home, not to a place, but to myself. This center isn't just about healthcare, I told the crowd. It's about dignity. It's about reminding people they matter before the world tells them otherwise. I paused, and for the first time in my life, I saw my parents looking at me not with confusion, but awe. Not because I had earned their respect, but because I no longer needed it. You don't always get the apology. You don't always get the moment where they say, "We were wrong, we should have seen you." Sometimes, your story ends not with reconciliation, but with resolution, and that's enough. Enough to sleep at night, enough to stand tall, enough to teach others they can too. My advice: stop waiting for permission to thrive. Stop auditioning for love. Stop twisting yourself into shapes just to fit inside a family that was never designed to hold you. You're allowed to outgrow them. You're allowed to shine brighter than they ever imagined. You're allowed to say, "I deserve more," and then go get it. And when you do, when you finally take your place at the table you built, look around. You'll see others there too. People like us, the overlooked, the underestimated, the dismissed, and you'll realize you were never alone. You just hadn't arrived yet. I'm not angry anymore. I don't want revenge. I don't want to shame them. I just want peace. And I have it now. Not because they gave it to me, but because I stopped letting their silence define my worth, because I stood up, because I spoke, because I rose. So if you're watching this, wondering if your time will come, it will. But not when they clap. Not when they change. Not when they finally say, "You matter." It comes the moment you decide you always did. Always. Even when they couldn't see it. Even when they didn't say it. Even when they loved someone else louder. You were always the story worth telling. You are your own proof. And this is your beginning.